Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we are diving back into the earliest days of the Federation. We're going to be taking a look at the first century of all things Star Trek. We're going to be starting in with a little bit of Enterprise, and then we're going to be diving into Discovery. Before we go too far down this path, let's make sure we know who all is joining us for the evening. So, Kristin, you are up first.
Hey, my name is Kristin Jackson. I'm a graphic designer and visual communication specialist, currently working mostly in the film industry. Also a DragonCon attendee and a lover of all things Star Trek and MCU.
Robyn?
Hi, my name is Robyn. I am a podcaster. I have a podcast, a comics podcast, indie comics podcast called Diversity Issues, where we talk about diversity in indie comics. I am also a huge Star Trek fan. Also love Stargate and Battlestar Galactica. So basically, you throw star in the name of the show and I will watch it.
Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth Noble, and I'm an author of mostly paranormal thrillers and paranormal romance. A lot of diversity. Also a big Star Trek fan, Star Wars, Battlestar, same. You put a star in it, and I'm a fan.
Star is born. Joshua.
Hello, my name's Joshua Palmatier. I write epic fantasy novels. I have 9 out there so far, and hopefully we'll have 3 more out this coming year. And I also run the small press called Zombies Need Brains, which does themed anthologies, and also recently started up a magazine called ZNB Presents that we're running through Patreon. So if you want to be a subscriber, check it out. We do 2 stories a month with 2 illustrations on Patreon. Just look up Zombies Need Brains.
Marx?
Yeah, I'm Marx Pyle. What am I? I'm an author. I'm a podcaster. Genretainment and S&P Now. One's a review show, one's an interview show, and also an occasional filmmaker. Been a fan of Star Trek since I could watch TNG at least, and also MCU, Supernatural, and I usually write urban fantasy or other types of sci-fi fantasy.
Jay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Requard. I'm an epic fantasy and sword and sorcery author. I'm also the host of the YouTube show, Pondering the Orb, and the podcast where No Bubs Has Gone Before, Star Trek The Next Generation podcast, hosted by me and my dad. I'm a lifelong Star Trek fan, so I've seen and watched everything multiple times over, and I'm really happy to be here tonight.
So let's start around a little bit the earliest days of the NX-01, the first starship to be able to hit that Warp 5 magic number. As we all kind of remember going back, really it started out as the, hey, where are we going to go to this week, and kind of move forward. But let's dive a little bit to the first couple of seasons. So, Kristin, I'm going to pick on you with this one, but what was kind of for your remembrances? How did you take to early days of Trek? Now, we were kind of following up on DS9 and following up on Voyager, and we've had we were moving things forward. Now we're going to kind of drop back and go back to the early days. So when you first sort of dove into the early days of Enterprise, what were your thoughts on that and looking at the earliest days of the Federation?
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a hard question. I guess I was mostly hoping to get out of the show some backstory and new information about this world of Star Trek, and hoping that they weren't going to do any revisionist history and kind of do things that were, shoehorning in new canon into the old canon. So, that was kind of one of the things that with Discovery that I was having issues with, until hopefully they did end up giving a satisfying explanation. But I was just, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of exploring all the different aspects of this world. and giving us more color than just simply expanding on the Enterprise that we knew in the original Star Trek. And they're kind of expanding outwards and sideways and in the past and towards the future. So I really enjoyed that about the show.
Robyn, any thoughts?
So my first Trek was Voyager. I grew up in Star Trek. My mother loved the original series. My father loved DS9, but Voyager was the first Trek that I chose. But we always, in all of those, we got this very far future vision of what humanity could be, right? So the thing that I always wondered about was like, how do we connect the dots? Because in general, I consider myself an optimistic pessimist to where I feel very strongly that we can get there. We can have the Federation. But sometimes I get a little pessimistic when I look around and I'm like, man, you guys, we are messing this up. So the thing that I loved about Enterprise, just as a concept, was that it connects the dots. It takes us more so from where we are to where we want to be. And it shows those kind of early steps and stumbling blocks of developing the Federation before it was the Federation. And you had like so much excitement and hope and joy to be like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the thing where, humanity for so long has wanted to, reach beyond our solar system, reach beyond our own star system. And it's like, yes, we're finally here. And so just kind of having that excitement of that exploration. And it's almost like we can reach it. You know what I mean? It's like at the time it was like 150 years off, but it's like that window is getting smaller and smaller to where it's like, that can be us. We can make it there. So that's one of the things I really loved about just the concept of Enterprise. Also that it's just like cool space romps, so I love that too.
Elizabeth?
Sorry about that. So I watched the original series when it originally came out and have been watching Star Trek ever since. The thing I really liked about Enterprise, and the thing that I really wanted it to be a little bit more of, was knowing the history before the original series. And it did go into that, and it showed how they brought the different, humans and the Vulcans came together. Like you said, it's been 20 years since that show was out, and I did not rewatch it before this. But the thing I liked the most, I think, was just the history of what I had originally seen in the original series.
Joshua?
Yeah, when I heard originally that they were going to do the Enterprise and bring Enterprise to the small screen and whatnot, what I wanted to see most, or what I was most anticipating, was seeing how the Federation actually got formed. I wanted to see, like Robyn said, I wanted to see how they connected the dots from where they were at the beginning to getting to the Federation that we see in all of the previous iterations of Star Trek. I came in with Next Generation, although I very vaguely remember watching the original series when my dad watched it. But I was big into Next Generation when it came out. So I wanted to know, how did we get from there to here? And that's what I was most anticipating with Enterprise. And we got a little bit of that. We didn't get as much of it as I wanted. I really wanted a lot more of the dots connected and a little bit more story behind it all. I don't know if that's because the Enterprise got cut off a little bit short and didn't get to go as long as the 7-year itch that all of the previous ones had, but so maybe we would have gotten to that if they had been allowed to continue. But yeah, that's what I was most looking forward to, was seeing how the Federation got formed, how we got all of these races into it, and etc. And so yeah, it was that's what I wanted to see, and it was only mildly satisfied with Enterprise.
Yeah, that's where we're going next, but we'll hold off on that for a minute. Marx, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like when you go backwards, it's really tricky. It doesn't usually work super well. And so I was really hesitant. Like I started off, I had seen some original series, but it wasn't until TNG that I got to watch like straight up, like every episode. And I watched that, DS9, Voyager, I loved the momentum that was happening. So going backwards was a little frustrating. And I just was a little cautious about it. And when it started, like I appreciated in season 1 where they went more low tech, like they had their grappling hook and they couldn't really use transporters as well, or the universal translator. So I did appreciate them doing that. It was interesting to see a Star Trek show having those kind of challenges. But yeah, I do feel like they could have explored more of the lore and that build up to the Federation a little bit more. I think season 4, some of those episodes did a good job fleshing out some lore, some backstory of augments and the mirror universe and some other stuff. I think that showed a lot what could have been some more seasons. But yeah, I had mixed feelings about it.
Jay?
So I love the world building of the first 2 seasons. I really like the NX-01 and watching them, as Mark's mentioned, like they don't have transporters. They really don't have a universal translator. It's mostly an all-human crew except for the Denobulan medical officer and the Vulcan science. I thought sickbay was really fascinating, and the fact that like you didn't have biobeds at the time. You really had kind of a doctor in there with all of his little creatures trying to figure out how to cure people of all these things that they were running into for the first time. I like the character of Captain Archer as he progresses, even though, I think he's very much a reflection of how 9/11 changed the show. But looking back, way, way back when I was in my teenage years and watching this, I think people forget that like it wasn't called Star Trek in the first season. It was just called Enterprise. They had tried for some strange reason to kind of divorce it from the idea that this is Star Trek, even though it's a Star Trek origin story. And at the same time, like I think we were around the time Star Trek Nemesis was coming out. And there was kind of a general just fan fatigue. There had been a lot of stuff since, DS9 going through Voyager, and then you had the TNG films. I think that a lot of people were just a little bit worn out by the franchise at that point. And, it ends at season 4, I think, for a reason, and then it takes a break for a while, I think, for a good reason, too.
So, yeah, Robyn.
So just kind of piggybacking off of what Jay said, I wonder if the reason they didn't originally, because I remember this, I was just trying to do somewhat of a rewatch to catch up for this panel, but they hadn't formed, they hadn't dubbed themselves Starfleet yet. So I wonder if that's the reason why they didn't, I wonder if it was kind of like a subversive kind of play there where they were trying to not use Star Trek because they weren't officially Starfleet yet. I remember one of the episodes, one of the the temporal agents from the 32nd century said, he mentioned the Federation, and Archer was like, what's that? And so I wonder if that's why they didn't yet. You just made me think of that when you said that. So that would be cool if it was kind of intentional in that way, but yeah, maybe not.
I mean, that's how I took it at the time, was that they didn't call it Star Trek because it wasn't yet Star Trek, so it was supposed to be the origin of Star Trek. But yeah, you would think that they would still want to at least tag it as the franchise somehow in the title. But yeah, at the time when they said we're just going to call it Enterprise, I took it to be what Robyn said.
Well, I remember advertisements being like, "This isn't your father's Star Trek." They were trying to be cool and hip.
Well, they were trying to use it to help save Paramount Network, the UPN network at the time too.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it wasn't Stargate like pretty big right then too. I remember reading some articles about how Stargate was.
And all these shows were expensive.
Yeah,
too. At the time, like a lot of them were practical effects driven. So, that's an era of like from what I've read from filmmaking, I know there's two filmmakers here. Practical effects at one point were just really, really expensive, and this is, you know, even before CGI came in with TNG, like it's these productions, especially for Paramount, had gotten very costly, hadn't they? Like, I think Paramount was actually in some sort of money spiral at the time, because this was, did they still own New Line at the time? Because I think like New Line came in and saved Paramount, right, with like Lord of the Rings. But Paramount was like hemorrhaging money at this point.
Well, there was a lot of expense. So Robyn, let's actually kind of pick up on that. You know, we start getting into this idea of the temporal war and the Xindi and things that were definitively not within at least known canon. You know, when things started going down that path, you know, what did that do for you in terms of the story and in terms of the universe? You know, when we look at that season 3 and some of the heavier stuff they tried to hit, and you're like, I don't remember, you know, we never talked about it. There was room for it within canon, but it definitively sort of shifted the game a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to have to somewhat abstain on this question because I was rewatching it. I didn't make it all the way through season 3. I tried to pick certain episodes, and I was like, as I'm watching them, I was like, there's some details that's like tickling the back of my brain that I know I'm missing. So I went back and watched more of season 2. But just from a general perspective, I feel like after they kind of got their sea legs under them, where you're like establishing, you know, some of, like we were saying, in somewhat gimmicky ways, but it still kind of like sings to the heart of a Trek fan, where we're like, oh, like Jay mentioned before, like, oh, look, they're actually trying out the translator. Oh, look, they're creating the universal translator. Like, you can't have an entire show ride on just those kinds of cute gimmicky things that we all love. We're eventually going to need some kind of through line, big bad that keeps us captivated, and some story that keeps us captivated. And that's part of why I stopped trying to skip through, because I was like, oh, this is getting interesting. I need to make sure I get these details and going back to it. So that's my thoughts on that.
So now you got to go back and restart your rewatch. Elizabeth?
Now I want to go back and rewatch it. Yeah, there was just one episode that really stuck out, and my favorite character was Trip, and they did where there was I can forget how it happened, but there was a second Trip created, and they went through this whole moral dilemma he ended up having to die. Sorry if I spoiled anything. But I like the storylines that are more focused on the characters and not so much the tech, and how the characters got into what would become the Federation. They got onto the Enterprise, and what their different roles were and how they interacted with each other and developed.
Joshua?
Okay.
Let me make another cup of tea. I'll be back in a half an hour.
Season 3 is where I really feel like Enterprise like came into its own, because and this might be the epic fantasy, you know, writer in me or whatever, but they actually started like a storyline, a through line that would take them through the season, and with the whole Delphic region mystery and all that kind of stuff. So like up to season 3, I mean, I was tagging along, but I can't say I was like really into it and you know, really engaged. I was enjoying the individual episodes and whatnot. And yes, Elizabeth, I agree that they were starting to play around with characters a little bit more rather than world. But when they hit season 3 and they brought in the Delphic region and the Xindi and everything, I was just like, oh, I'm all in. So that's the season where I really, really became engaged. And I just felt like there was something to latch on to, something for you to follow. It wasn't just, you know, oh, I'm going to have a cup of tea for this week and watch the Enterprise episode. This you were a little more invested, I think, in season 3. And then with the temporal stuff, when they started bringing that in, I was interested in that. I really felt like they never quite gave us a satisfactory ending or explanation on all of that. It was like really, really interesting, and I was following along with it. But in the end, it just kind of faded, or at least in my mind, it kind of faded. And again, maybe that's because they had plans for it in later seasons that they never got to. But the Delphic region, that whole season 3, in my opinion, that was like the height of Enterprise. That because we actually had a major plot line to follow, and so that's where I really became engaged and got really excited about Enterprise.
I felt like it just kind of stopped.
Yeah.
The temporal, in my opinion, the temporal plot lines just kind of stopped. I mean, I don't feel they kind of ended it. They gave us an ending, but it felt like it was like, oh crap, we're not going to have another season, so let's cram everything into a like an episode or 2 and try to explain it all off in 2 hours. And I was just like, nah, it needed a lot more than 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there was part of it at that time, which was they had an expectation of at least 5 seasons. And then it was like, yeah, you're not getting a 5th season. Figure it out, and gave them a half season to sort of wrap everything up. Mm-hmm. And there was the, we want our magical 7 seasons, but we expect at least 5, 4. Okay, 4. We'll go with 4.
Yeah, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it.
Marx?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated season 3. I mean, that a lot of Star Trek doesn't have that like whole seasonal arc type of thing, except for Deep Space Dominion War. And although now we get it a lot with the newer Star Trek, so they're kind of pioneering in that way. And I found it interesting. This new Xindi race was interesting that there's multiple species, and that dynamic, and then how that ties into the temporal war and such. Of course, the attack 9/11, there's parallels there too. So I did find it interesting. I think it showed what was possible with the show in season 3. I mean, by then I went to 2 seasons. It was like I wasn't completely checked in at that point as much as I usually am with Star Trek. So, but I remember season 4, at least for me, I even liked, and maybe it's because I was halfway checked out in season 3, and then I checked back in season 4, I really liked a lot of their multi-parter episodes and stuff. But it was pioneering in that way for Star Trek, and it showed that they knew they needed to, kind of mix things up, kind of re-energize.
Jay?
So I really like watching the progression of Captain Archer from kind of this happy-go-lucky explorer that, has some rough run-ins with the Klingons and everything to kind of this almost dark Jack Bauer-like character. Star Trek almost became 24 after the attack in Florida. And I think it was a really interesting explanation or attempt an attempt to explore kind of the idea of like, okay, humanity's really been hurt by something catastrophic and devastating and unexplained, which I think a lot of people felt after 9/11. And okay, how do we really kind of move forward past this idea that all we have is war with each other? Yeah. I think that the Xindi War tried to approach that, but I think, and Joshua mentioned it, with the Time War kind of being mixed in there and being treated as a really important element to the Xindi War. By the time we get to the actual end of the Xindi War, the Time War element has kind of basically disappeared. And then, as mentioned, into season 3, into season 4, they kind of really wrap it up in a slapdash way. I actually think that, and we'll touch on it later, that the stuff with the Temporal War actually starts figuring itself out, in Discovery. But for those last few seasons of Star Trek Enterprise, they played with some really cool ideas. Like I like what they did with like the Vulcan Forge and like Vulcans rediscovering their spirituality through the Katra. That episode, I think, Elizabeth, I think you mentioned it. It's the one with Sim. That one is honestly just one of the best episodes of Star Trek out there from like a drama perspective. Like how do you really? We're trying to save our friend, and to save our friend, we have to basically harvest the organs from this thing that we grew. But, there's been real scientific conversation over the last decade of like, why don't we grow organs? Well, okay, what if we take that storyline and what if we grow a person to get those organs? Looking at those kind of moral and ethical dilemmas in that sense was really cool. But I think with the end of season 4, I hate that episode so much I can't even remember its title. It's just such an anchor of a disappointment. Like, even if they had gone to a season 5, it'd be really hard to recover from that, because it's like, okay, you not only see the unification of the Federation or the ratification of whatever they're signing at the end, but like, where do you go from there? Kind of, I think they really did kind of get cut off at the last minute and really suffered for it.
Kristin?
I guess all I can say is that since I only watched episodes, individually, long after the fact of airing, is that I do appreciate that Monster of the Week format. The Alien of the Week, the Crisis of the Week, because then I was able to just drop in and appreciate various aspects of the show and the characters without necessarily needing to have the whole backstory of a season-long arc to know what's going on.
Yeah, and I that is the downside of the overarching plot, right? Because, you see it with Quantum Leap. The new Quantum Leap, anyway. Because I will say, when the Enterprise was first on, I was only catching sporadic episodes. And so when I hit season 3, I'd watch an episode and I'd be like, I don't know what the hell's going on. And it was only later, when I got to do a rewatch of it from, episode 1 all the way through, that I really appreciated season 3 for what it was. And so, yeah, that's certainly a downside of the overarching plot.
So let me just kind of throw this out there, and Jay started down this path a little bit, but I'm just going to throw it out as an open question.
Uh-oh.
The way with the final episode, right? It was kind of I guess we can't end the series without at least showing you the real founding of the Federation. It was, I don't think that was the intention for wrapping up the season. It was I guess that was the entire purpose of the show. So we at least ought to give you that. Does anybody want to rant? Comment on that particular episode.
It's just done in such poor spirits of what Star Trek is. It's cheaply done. There's not even the frame story of Riker trying to morally deal with like his decision making, going back to the Pegasus episode on TNG. Like, no one knows what they're talking about, because it's literally been more than a decade when that episode airs. And like, it's just really hard to take that kind of big moment in history and squish it down to 43 minutes. Even if you have Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Frakes guest starring. I think Jonathan Frakes directed it too, and even he said, like, we didn't do this thing justice. It's just,
That's what I mean. It just stopped. They threw a bunch of stuff in together and then said, that's the end of the series. Bye. It just stopped. There was no real wrap up.
And that whole last episode didn't feel like an Enterprise episode. It felt like a Next Generation episode. Not just because Riker and Deanna were there, but the whole framework and the whole feel of the episode, it was just a Next Generation episode. It did not have the feel of an Enterprise episode. So you literally, it's like you're running into a wall when it starts. You're just like, what the hell? This is not the same show.
Well, and I think there's been talk in years since going and saying, it was kind of like Next Gen came in to say that was a cute attempt. Thanks for playing. And We're going to at least try to pull you in some numbers for the last show.
Oh, okay. Since we're ranting here, there's even okay. So
I apologize to everyone in advance for opening up the rant.
So that very last scene where Archer is giving his speech, they could have done so many things production wise and just storytelling wise to make that thing land. And then they zoom over to Counselor Troy being like, I had to recite this speech in grade school. And it's just like just kill the momentum right there for the character. And then Riker being the cook on the ship, like that's what every holodeck, person going to the holodeck gets to be if they see these holo novels. You're the cook. Like, come on. Just
that was the feeling exactly while watching the episode.
All right. Well, I think we'll put a cap on that one there.
No.
And
okay, we can
all
put a cap on the rant, but we have to talk about one other thing about Enterprise before you move on to Discovery.
All right,
which is Faith of the Heart.
Great song. Great song. If you don't have faith of the heart, I don't know you.
So yeah, what do people think about the Faith of the Heart?
Go with the pop song for the intro.
Yeah, for the intro. I thought it was fine. I mean, I can't say I, loved it for an intro for it, but I mean, there's people that literally like hate on it. Like,
I mean, I'll remember it forever.
I think again,
it tortures you so much you fall in love with it.
Well, I will say that when I rewatched it, I never skipped the intro. I always listened through the whole thing. So, I don't know. I don't know what that's
always racing. I love generally theme music. I can hum the Voyager theme music. And as a matter of fact, I do annoyingly hum it at the top of my lungs in the kitchen on a regular basis.
That's awesome.
I tried desperately to fast forward past it. For some reason, my brain will start singing Faith of the Heart. And after the second verse, it will switch over to Aerosmith's Don't Want to Miss a Thing. I don't know. They sound too similar to me. I will start with one song.
That would have been an interesting choice.
After the first one, I mean, try it. Sing the first. I don't want to do it here. Hold up, hold up.
Oh no, we're gonna hold you to that to cap out the show.
Yeah, if you sing the first two verses, in my brain, I make it through the first two, and then I start singing "Don't Want to Miss a Thing."
That's literally why they went with it. That was the production reason behind the scene. Why they went with it. They saw the success of Aerosmith and Armageddon, and they thought, oh, if we even just take any sci-fi property, let's take Star Trek. Paramount's let's take Star Trek and give it a pop intro. Just there's a pop song now to Armageddon, and that'll get it over. And it kind of did. Kind of.
I think that kind of also ties into that getting away from Star Trek as a, this is not your father's Star Trek type of thing. It creates a very strong separation right from the intro of the series. No
classical music here. We got pop music.
Yep.
So as we move forward, call it a good 90 years, then we move up into just before original series, right? We're going that decade before original series, and we move forward into Discovery, right? So Elizabeth, for that opening episode of Discovery, it was definitively not your dad's Star Trek. It was, and knowing that you're leading into looking at some of those characters we kind of had stories of, and we knew those hints of, but it was this is how we got to where Star Trek became, right? It was that lead into original series. What were you looking for to get out of Discovery, and are you getting?
So the thing I really love about Discovery is the thing I hate about Discovery is, and my dad didn't have the original Star Trek. It was my Star Trek was the original Star Trek. It takes it back before the original Star Trek, but it's too good. It's too modern. It's too have too many things that weren't even thought of in the original series, which is really cool. But it's like, well, this seems more advanced than the original series, and they had to fix that, so they all jumped forward the 400 years or whatever it was. But I loved it and I hated it all at the same time. I really liked the storylines, but the things they were doing didn't mesh with what the original series was. It meshes with Star Trek in general, but not how the series started.
Joshua?
I mean, I agree with that, but at the same time, I'm like, you got to give them some leeway. I mean, you can't expect the modern audience to buy into a Star Trek where, you know, the consoles are just little blinking lights and that kind of thing. So I see Jay's like all antsy now. So I gave them leeway. I was like, okay, fine. Yes, we can have the, you know, modern computer screens and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I did have major concerns about the whole, you know, mushroom drive and all of that. I'm like, okay, they're pulling this out of their ass. I mean, it's like, how the hell could this jive with, you know, what we already know about Star Trek? And yes, eventually they gave us a reason why we had never heard of the mushroom drive and never heard of all these people, especially things like, you know, Michael being Spock's like sibling or something like that. It was like, okay, why have we never heard about this? And so am I happy with the reason that they gave for all of that? I can't say I'm excited about it. I was happy from the writer's perspective. I was like, okay, good. They gave us a reason. It's not 100% believable, but it's 80% believable. And, you know, I guess I can be okay with the fact that nobody spilled the beans over the last, you know, 400 years. But but you know, I really loved it. I love the fact that we're getting some new Star Trek. From the writer's perspective, I felt like the first season was very rushed. It was going at like ultrasonic speed, and I felt like it needed to slow down a little bit, not as slow as original Star Trek or even Next Generation. But I in the long run, I know a lot of people are complaining about it and with lots of various complaints. But I was happy. I was happy. We have something new in Star Trek. We have some new characters. We have an interesting plot line, and I was in from the start. I did not like the Klingons. The remake of the Klingons I thought was stupid as hell. But you know, I gave them kudos for trying.
Marx? Yeah, so going back is tough, like I said before. and there were different reasons why I had problems with this one, or different reasons why what I loved and hated about it or disliked about it. I do have to say that from like 3 on, I think it's a great show. And I mean, I like season 1 and 2 also, but I mean, I think it really finds its footing there. And I really think, I mean, you got to make it a little flashy, but Strange New Worlds found the right balance. This was the beta test for Strange New Worlds. And I hated the clean on designs. I think it was a bad idea. It was also probably really expensive and made acting really tough and everything. And that was prosthetics. I think it was just a bad idea all around, unfortunately. But you know, I look at it and I'm just like, I don't understand why they put in that time period. Except for Spock being her brother. There's no reason why that couldn't have been and you know, set further in the future. And not even fighting the Klingons again. I mean, politics change, things happen, power struggles and stuff. And they could have met the Klingons then, and it could have been, then we wouldn't be debating like, you know, there's no mushroom drives, there's none of this, you know, they'd have free reign to do whatever they want. So I think that was a misstep for whatever reason. They just wanted to go backwards. Maybe it was in the idea of rebooting everything, perhaps, but they had to adjust based on feedback. So, but it is flashy, it is exciting and stuff, and I do feel that once they go to the far future, it really, once they're freed up from that canon, you know, and the conflicts of that canon that distract us, we can then enjoy the spectacular special effects and action and get to know the characters and stuff like that. And I find it a lot more enjoyable at that point.
Jay?
So I think the first and second season are actually really good if you just kind of separate yourself from the aesthetic of it. I think like everything, and it's not the characters, it's not the stories. It's really how everything looks, from like the uniform to the ship, from the uniforms to the ships, to kind of just like they dropped suddenly a lot of aliens on us that kind of were given no explanation. Like even in TNG, Worf was given an explanation of like, okay, this is a Klingon officer. He is one of our first Klingon officers, but all of a sudden you have a very diverse crew in terms of aliens that, you know, kind of really aren't built upon enough. But by the time you get to season 2, they've kind of built out this idea that like, okay, the Federation's far more diverse than we originally thought, or as it was presented in the original series. I love the Michael Burnham character. I think that they did a lot of stuff with her over time that really made her kind of earn that hero mantle, which I think is kind of hard to hand off. Like we just talked about Archer. Archer never really got the hero mantle because they had to give him like all these really dark things to do in season 3, to the point where like you look at Archer and you're like, he's not a hero anymore. He's kind of a space pirate. Michael Burnham is kind of like doing these things that are like really ballsy and really cool, and they're taking them places that like Spock used to go. Like if you remember the first Star Trek the motion picture, it's not Jim Kirk jumping out of the Enterprise to go and meet V'ger. It's Spock jumping out of the Enterprise to go and meet V'ger. So I really like how they built this narrative tie that like, okay, Spock may have a human sister, but they're very much alike in the fact that they're willing to jump into the unknown and do whatever they have to get anything done. I think when they finally set them, I think it was 900 years in the future, I think that kind of world building really helped like bring the show back to at least some of the aesthetic that I think we were missing in the first 2 seasons, especially in terms of like the specially colored uniforms, just kind of the way that the ships looked. But you also started playing with like, you know, the obvious progression of some of these technologies. Like I think at one point in the 33rd century, they have like a holographic ship that is 100% generated out of holograms, and that's the ship. Like that's awesome. I think that the Klingons, and this is where the downfall, I think, of like the first season and the second season, because they tried to fix it, second season, but I think the Klingons were such a turnoff for the fan base that a lot of people like got angry just because of that, because they really looked awful. They kind of had them saying the right things about Kalis and trying to keep Klingon purity and all of these things, but they introduced like this kind of, I guess, heavy metal H.R. Geiger aesthetic that we had never seen before with the Klingons. And if you're going to like introduce that, you know, there has to be kind of an explanation to that too, especially when, you know, by the time you get to season 2, they're all back to having manes and ridges on their forehead, and they're all wearing beards and, you know, walking around the Klingon armor and having batlets and everything. You know, between season 1 and season 2, what happened was Takuma, this part of like, was this entire culture like a cult or something that kind of took over? And, you know, like, was this the Taylor Swift of their day? You know, I think it's one of those things that like we just kind of didn't get explained, and I think it really takes away from that first season, somewhat of that second season too.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Taylor Swift would, you know, be a threat to all humankind. So anyway, so Kristin, how about you? What are your thoughts on Discovery?
Oh, I love Discovery. But I also was one of the people who was noticing all the contradictions and the canon that just wasn't meshing with my original series of Star Trek. So I understand, completely the whole visual effects have changed radically in the last 50 years. And so you could not expect to them, do a a series set prequel that looks anything like what we were getting in the 1960s, but they kept some of those original little sound effects. If you notice, they've carried those through lines, and they gave little explanations, like with Pike, and he just detests the holographic, communications. So he's like, I don't want Enterprise to have any holograms in there. So, okay, we'll communicate the old-fashioned way with the two-dimensional screens, you old-fashioned fart type of. And let's see, and I love the relationships too with Burnham and Giorgio. That, especially in the most recent season, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there was really emotional moments between the two of them that I almost felt like crying along with them. And Paul and Hugh, their relationship, was just really great, and being able to see that develop, and there's a lot of characters that. They start one direction and then they kind of evolve and change and go back. Ash is one of those people. He has been like through 3 or 4 different versions of Ash. He's kind of the guy from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Oh gosh, I can't. I'm just blanking on his name right now. But he's the one who is like, he's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and he's Hydra, and then he's he was all over the map.
I remember his name, yeah.
So with them, in the spore drive, why is there a spore drive that's so advanced, and here the Enterprise is just clunking along at warp factor 3, and then they provided a plausible explanation for why that whole technology just disappeared from Federation history, and all the people with it, and Spock's sister. How in the heck did we not know that the man had a sister all these years? And then there's an explanation for that. So I do agree with everyone else that when they took Discovery into the far future and were able to detach from all that prequelness of the series, and are now often able to do their own thing, that was the best move the show has probably done.
It's
Robyn,
Ward,
how
by the
about
way.
you? Oh,
Ward.
sorry, Mike.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's really important.
Yeah. Ward.
Yes.
Ward.
Yes,
Hey,
Ward, yes.
Ward. All the faces of Ward. Ash is the Ward of Discovery.
So there were certain things that didn't bother me as much as other people because of the way I connected with Star Trek. Where people don't like the aesthetics because like it doesn't match with the original series. Because I didn't connect with that myself, I connected with it through my mom watching it. I remember doing a rewatch as an adult and thinking to myself, like, is that a pencil? Like they had pencils? Because of course it was the 60s, but like I watched it at a time where like we have smartphones. So we take all of our notes in smartphones, you know what I mean? And things like that. And I was like, dang, they still got a pencil on a starship. You know what I mean? So when we got Discovery, I was like, okay, yeah, we cannot have that level of technology with the original series. And then the piece about us not really knowing about Michael, I didn't have a strong connection with the original series, but like, didn't Spock like not tell people about Sabak? Didn't he like not tell people about Sarek? And like Sarek just like popped on. I feel like I remember one episode Sarek just like popped on the bridge and like Kirk was like, "How are you?" And he's like, and Spock's like, "That's my father." It was like, what the hell?
Tower of Babel. Yeah.
Right. So I was just kind of like, that's what Spock does. He doesn't tell people things unless there's a reason for him to tell people things. And then with the Klingons. So again, because my Trek was Voyager, I connected strongly with the non-human character that I connected strongly with was Tuvok. So I had a stronger interest in Vulcan culture than I did in Klingon culture. And a lot of my friends who are really into TNG, they connected with Worf. So they have a stronger connection to Klingons and Klingon aesthetic and Klingon culture and things like that I just don't have. I mean, I know about them, you know what I mean? But I get more interested in Vulcan lore because we learned so much about that through Tuvok in Voyager. So when we saw the Klingons, I was just kind of like, yeah, they look weird, but whatever. And in terms of just like overall structure, I agree 100% that I feel like it really gets its legs in the third season because them going in the future allowed them to kind of release this burden of trying to fit into the original lore and trying to piece themselves into that. The first season, I almost felt like the first half and the second half were like two different seasons. The second half, when they were in the mirror universe, was amazing. Aesthetically, I thought it was gorgeous. And from a storytelling perspective too, I thought it was really neat that they got stuck there and they were like, we cannot get back. So they were there for like a long time. You know what I mean? They were there, I think like maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month or two or something like that. Because every other Trek series, you know, they're there for like a day or two, maybe a couple hours. And then like, you know, space romp of the week kind of thing, they're back. You know what I mean? But they spent the whole half season trying to figure out how to get out of the mirror universe. And that just felt more realistic to me. So I really enjoyed that about the first season of Discovery.
So Joshua, I'm going to throw this out there for you. What's been your favorite episode, arc, whatever with Discovery? And what are you hoping for them to finish out with season 5? Since they've already announced that'll be the last season.
Well, first of all, I'm pissed that it's the last season. and from what I've read, they didn't expect it to be the last season. They intended it to go beyond season 5, and they had to go back and refilm some stuff so that they could finish off some plot lines that they hadn't finished off and whatnot. But so we'll see what happens with season 5. But in general, I'm like, it's successful. Why are you ending it? You know, it's like, sure, there's a line where you take things too far and you just keep things going when you shouldn't. But Millennium is an example of that. But in terms of like what plot line I felt was the best, even though this. I agree with everybody that once they jumped into the future, that it felt freer. I felt like they got the pacing right once they jumped into the future. Like the first season was like way too ultra fast, and the second season was also a little too fast. But to be honest, at this point, I would probably say the second season is my favorite because I felt like there was a connecting plot line through the whole thing, and it was a mystery plot line. I feel like Star Trek works best when it's a mystery. Like if you look at all of the movies are basically mysteries, and they're just set in space. And so the second season was like an actual mystery. It was like, what the hell's going on? Why are we seeing this figure all of the time? And you know, and so I felt like the second season has been my favorite, even if it was a little paced a little bit too fast. But it had like this great climax. You know, they're jumping into the future, and they all have to decide whether they want to go to the future. And of course, you know, they have the Pike's Enterprise involved in the whole thing along the way. And so in terms of the best plot line that engaged me the most, I would have to say it's season 2. Season 3 was mostly playing around with the future. And I agree with what, like, I think it was Jay that said this earlier. I really like the fact that they moved the tech. Like we've all been dealing with the same tech for all of the Star Trek so far, you know, whether it was even Enterprise was like early tech, but like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of them had the exact same tech level. And so them jumping into the future allowed them to really play around with like, what is future tech going to look like? That's probably one of the biggest things I noticed when they jumped to the future, is like all of the beds and the furniture was all floating, you know, and everything could like deconstruct and then reconstruct itself. Like, look at Booker's ship. You know, it could deconstruct and reconstruct into something else. And I felt like by jumping into the future, they really had the chance to like play with the tech and say, like, this is what the best sci-fi minds of our generation can come up with for future tech. And we've seen that with all of the other Star Treks. What Star Trek projects onto the screen, that's what everybody's going to shoot for. You know, like tablets that first showed up on Next Generation. You know, little communicators and flip phones, that was on the original series, for crying out loud. So if we can get in Discovery, if we can get a little vision of the future, of what we might be shooting for in terms of science, just regular science, I think that's spectacular. So season 2, plot-wise, season 2 is probably my favorite. I feel like it has the best connections and the best interest and the best climax. In terms of, vision of the future, I would have to say season 3 and beyond is where I end up landing.
Marx,
I could tag on to that, for me, that was one of the things that I loved the most about the original series, is that it was very hopeful and forward looking. And we were able to get a glimpse of, at that time, what future technology would look like. And that's what they did with the season 3 on Discovery, because we already have people working on stuff right now, like programmable metals that you can shape and send a little electric current through it, and it will reshape itself. And so we already have like the beginnings of that sort of technology that they're looking at right now. And that's kind of where I think Trek is the strongest, is that it gives us a chance to see how what we're the origins of what we're doing right now, the very earliest steps, how it can turn out and look in the future. And it was only 50 years between the smartphone and the tricorders. And, we have stuff right now that we're using that was, first envisioned in Star Trek, the original series. So I really appreciate that too with season 3, is they took it forward like I think Star Trek does best.
I would argue we already have a tricorder with this thing. That's it.
That's it. The smartphone.
It can take
and it does your blood pressure and your heart rate, your breathing. It can do. There was something else I was seeing that they were going to start doing with the medical technology with smartphones. Blood sugar testing and stuff. It's crazy.
Well, yeah. Yeah, with the imaging you can do with these now, there's a lot of different things that you can use diagnostically, and as they continue to build more robust, Apple Watches and things like that can sense stuff through the skin, and some of the things that we see that are coming. Yeah, it's all here. It's all here. So, Marx, how about
you? They even made a warp bubble at CERN. Sorry, I hate to interrupt. They even created a warp bubble at CERN. Now, it's not anything applicable to like actually putting it around a ship and flinging that ship through space, but like we made a warp bubble. What?
I'm willing to give it a try.
Like I said, Star Trek gives you something to shoot for. It gives the scientists something to aim for, and maybe they don't get there, and maybe along the way they branch off into other things. Like look at Velcro. Velcro was just to hook things in zero gravity to the shuttle so it wouldn't float off. And then look at what we do with Velcro now. We never know exactly what the science is going to end up being used for, but Star Trek has always given us something to shoot for.
Dang. just
Yeah, I think that's what Star Trek's best at. Like what we could shoot for technology wise, what we could shoot for as a culture, as humanity can shoot for peace and working together, and also exploration. I think that's where, talking about writing wise, where Discovery was a little bit misstep, because I think it was too much of an action military show at first and didn't have that sense of exploration and such at first. It got it eventually, and in Strange New Worlds has it great. So I think so. I loved the Mirror Universe stuff in season 1. The second half of it, I thought that to me showed me what was possible with the show, and especially loved the twist with the captain and everything. That's something you wouldn't see usually in Star Trek. And then three on, I thought was really where it worked for them. It kind of was like a little bit like a drama in a way. Like that was originally a story idea, right? Like a ship from an old great Federation, if it's fallen and it comes to the future and tries to restart it. I think my favorite arc so far, I guess, would be the last season, because I love the idea of them exploring. Well, it had a very Star Trek ending to it. not to totally spoil it, but it was not an ending you get in Star Wars or or Halo or something. It's an ending you get in Star Trek. And it was great that it pushed it forward by it was a life force or something outside of the galaxy, which is kind of breaking a barrier that we haven't really broken before in Star Trek, which was cool. So yeah, I like that. I love how they have Book in there, and Saru, right? Doug Jones's character is another favorite of mine. Yeah, that's probably my favorite story arc.
Jay, how about you? What's your story? What do you want out of season 5?
Like Marx, I really love the last season. I think Species 10C is fantastic. I think the entire process that the crew has to go through to communicate with those creatures, just so they can stop devouring pieces of the Alpha Quadrant and, basically wiping out whole sectors of space. I love the idea that instead of Star Trek is always wonderful in pressing this kind of idea that you might think someone's your enemy, but they might not know. They might not have the ability to perceive the way you perceive things. And if you can just find a way to communicate with each other on a common level, in this case, the use of mathematics, you can actually reach some sort of accord and find some sort of peace. And I think that it might be the 9th or 10th episode of the season, but when they finally start talking to the 10C aliens, to me, that was pure Trek. It was some of the best television I had ever seen, and some of the best content I had ever seen out of the show. It nailed kind of this idea that we can go out into the stars and we can meet things that are so completely strange and different to our perceptions of how the universe should be. And instead of going to war with them, we can actually learn something and actually find some sort of peace. I mean, my hope for season 5, after this season, is that Species 10C doesn't disappear. If we're actually going outside of the known galaxy or the known universe, and they exist in their kind of own space in their own galaxy, I hope we explore that. I hope we just don't stay in the Alpha Quadrant or wherever that galaxy is. I hope the end of Star Trek Discovery season 5 is, them continuing in the year 3000 or whatever it is, to keep doing that, keep exploring, keep going out and actually discovering. I really hope that's where we end up. An ending kind of without an ending.
Kristin?
Let's see, for favorite arcs, it'd probably be Saru's journey for me. How he started off as a very, he had a herd evolutionary path, and so was, very reluctant, very hesitant, very risk adverse, and then became, a leader through his watching Michael as an example and taking steps on his own and learning confidence and learning how to use his own voice and his own agency. to become a person to admire in the series. So I kind of have followed Saru's journey, and I think that's one of my favorite things, my favorite arcs across all 3 seasons with the show.
Robyn, how about you?
Not to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I kind of agree with Marx and Jay. I really loved season 4 for several reasons, kind of like you said, with them figuring out what to do. And when you had almost kind of like going back to the root of the Federation, where there was this one scene where you had so many different alien races around the circle, all trying to work together to figure out what to do. To me, that really felt like a true Federation, because like throughout so much of Star Trek, I mean, it is very human centric. And in this one, it really felt like a coming together of so many different species, trying to make this thing work, having hope that something that they knew they could bring themselves out, almost kind of like trying to create a phoenix from the ashes, while at the same time you have this very technologically advanced species that you're trying to figure out how to communicate with. There was a movie based on a short story, The Arrival, that came out maybe 10 years ago. It felt very much like that, where they were like using mathematics to try to figure out how to communicate with this advanced alien species. So just from a storytelling perspective, and also just like the awe and beauty of what they had created in that century, was just very visually stunning. And also, Kristin made me think of Saru's character. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned that, but getting to see his joy from being part of a marginalized people, to see them 1,000 years in the future and be so prosperous, and for him to be able to see that. I always think about those kinds of things when people ask the question like, oh, if you could go back in time, like when would you go? I was like, never. I would take people and bring them forward. I would take all of the people through history who tried to make America better. And I'm sorry to be like America centric or whatever, but trying to make, us better, trying to make our country better, and bring them forward and say like, we're not where we want to be yet, but look where we got from your work. You know what I mean? And that's what I felt like Saru was able to actually see in that. And it was just really moving for me to watch him be able to see what his people had become, knowing and living through what they had been.
Elizabeth?
So always the basis of Star Trek has been acceptance, and my favorite characters and storyline throughout the whole thing. And I almost feel like the first 2 seasons are a different show than the later seasons, just because of the change. And I like the later seasons better. But I really liked Paul and Hugh and Adira and then Gray, and how they all interacted. They all came from, I mean, Paul and Hugh were already a couple, but they took in this child, because she was, 15 or 16 or something when they found her. And they let her blossom out into what she was. She then became they, what they were meant to really be. And nobody tried to squelch everything. Everybody was very supportive of her. And that's always been a real cornerstone of Star Trek, is the inclusion. And there's differences, but everybody can be together in their differences. And I really, really liked that. And I also like Cleveland Booker. He's the Greenpeace guy.
Well, as always, we could spend hours and hours sitting here talking Star Trek, but I guess we'll wrap this one. That's a good place to wrap this one up. But before we do that, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and then I think we'll have to come back and do another episode after Discovery does go in a wrap. So let's make sure we know where to find you guys. So, Kristin?
I'm really not on Twitter much anymore, but if anybody is there, it'd be at ANICAT @AnnieCat is where I am.
Robyn?
Our website is diversityissues.libsyn.com.
Elizabeth?
So I have a website. It's Emotion in Motion, and the address is Elizabeth-Noble.com.
Joshua?
You can find my website at joshuapalmatier.com. My Zombies Need Brains website is zombiesneedbrains.com. You can find me on Facebook under both of those names. On Facebook, my site is under Joshua B. Palmatier. And then I'm also on X or Twitter or whatever the hell you call it now. Unfortunately, my personal Twitter is Ben Tate Author. There's a long story there. So at Ben Tate Author. And then the Zombies Need Brains is under ZNB LLC. And of course, you can find me at Patreon under Zombies Need Brains.
Marx?
You can find me at marxpyle.com. You can also find my specific book stuff, especially stuff I do with other authors at cabotcrossing.com. And I'm sort of on different social media under my name, but on X Twitter, I'm still there just for out of habit, is Mr. Marx.
And Jay?
You can find me at jrequard.com. You can also find me basically everywhere on social media at jrequard. You can also find me on YouTube at Pondering the Orb, which is my YouTube show where we explore fantasy books, melodic death metal, and synthwave. Thank you, everyone, for having me.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamesgnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And we'll see you guys again soon.
Right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Right.